My name is Stephen Nestor, and you're listening to Poets of the Tabloid Murder. Today we have with us Andrew Vachss, author of his 8th Burke novel, Dead and Gone, a Knopf publication. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Andrew, when I pick up a book and I read it, and if I sometimes think the author is trying to tell me something or illuminate something to me or open her eyes, I bring up that old that overwrought phrase that I think is attributed to Hemingway or somebody. You know, if you want to send a message, call Western Union. But the more involved I got with this book, Dead and Gone, the first Burke novel I have read, I completely forgot that, and I'm ashamed I even thought of that. For it seems to me that the art of fiction perhaps is not the most important thing that you're doing as you write this novel or what you're trying to portray in that novel. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Specifically?
I'll try, but you're asking for a lot in a few words.
Take your time.
I'm a lawyer. I exclusively represent children. My clients have had everything that you can imagine, and perhaps more than you can, done to them. It's my job to protect them. The law is one way that I do it. However, I needed a much bigger jury than I could ever find inside a courthouse, hence these books. You have to understand I'm not Ernest Hemingway, and I didn't spend my time fishing and hunting and doing manly things. Instead, I was a federal investigator in sexually transmitted diseases. I was a caseworker in New York City's infamous Department of Welfare. I was in Biafra during that genocidal conflict that you're probably not old enough to remember, but if you want an update, just look at Rwanda. I ran a reentry center for ex-convicts, the service organization for urban migrants, and finally a maximum security prison for violent youth before I went near law school. So whether you consider me a good writer or a bad writer is sort of immaterial. I do know what I'm writing about. No,
I consider you a very good writer. I was just pointing out to the fact that when I read certain things, when you get back to some of the naturalistic writers at the turn of the century, they could often preaching to you about, the Sinclair Lewis or the Upton Sinclair were telling you things you really didn't want to know, basically because, maybe I'm not interested, or the style of the book was kind of not very interesting, which I think foremost is a very important thing for fiction. But I'd like to point out that your style of writing is, I think, it's one of the best styles I've come across in a long time. And
if you don't engage the reader, the message doesn't matter, because if someone doesn't finish the meal, then they never get to digest it.
I hear you on that. Why did you turn to fiction? You are obviously, I don't want to sound trite, you are some type of warrior. You're not a do-gooder, you're a warrior. How did you turn to fiction? Why did you turn to fiction?
Well, my first book was a textbook on juvenile violence. And that probably got me my best reviews, but certainly it never reached the wider audience. I want to pollute the jury pool. When you sit on a jury, when you make up your mind in any form at all when it comes to the protection of children, I don't feel like you've got enough information. I'm a working class boy. I don't own a newspaper, a radio station, a TV show. What method is there to communicate with the whole world other than a book?
Not many. That is usually the first form of media to get the message across.
Well, it's not that. It's what form of media is available to somebody in my situation.
Just this, the book.
Exactly.
That and a can of spray paint in the side of a subway car, if it really want to get elemental.
You know what? I've been accused of, my books have been accused of being graffiti, propaganda, almost anything that you can think of. Sometimes they're called literature engagée, and sometimes they're called graffiti. It doesn't matter to me. But the truth is, I turned to writing not as a substitute for what I'm doing, but as an organic extension of what I'm doing. So I've not abandoned my career or anything like that.
Oh no, I wasn't insinuating that at all.
Well, when you said you started out as a warrior, you became a writer. To me, it's another weapon. That's all.
Yeah, this is just your way of getting a message across, and I understand that this is the way that you help to finance your law firm. Well,
that's not actually accurate. It's been reported a lot, but here's the truth: I represented kids before I had any novels published. I financed originally by being a cab driver, and later by doing criminal defense, in which I was very good. And so I'd have, perpetrators pay in the morning for my representation of victims in the afternoon. However, after the first book came out, and because it succeeded beyond, my fantasies, I've been able since then to exclusively represent children, regardless of whether I make any money at it.
And this your dream of being a writer, well, your this success that this has not tainted you in any way. This is you're never going to get. This is the secondary thing. This is the cherry on top of the ice cream sandwich.
I've been, these books have been published in a couple of dozen different languages for 15 years now. If it was going to change me, I would have done it, I think.
Yeah, I'd have to say so too. Now, you've written the style of the book. I found it was the conversations between the characters. We're just gonna. I don't like to ask the authors to describe their books because sometimes it takes a long time, and this is a very and sometimes they don't know what to say about it.
Sure.
They have absolutely no idea. But what we have is a character named Burke.
Mm-hmm.
And we have some acquaintances and friends of his he's known over the years. We have some acquaintances and new friends he's just made. Basically, the plot revolves around someone trying to get even with Burke for something he's done to a pedophile, a form of retribution he attempted at a pedophile, and the pedophile tries to get back to him, but I might be giving too much away. Now he's got to track down who tried to kill him. Basically.
Yeah. The book opens with an attempt to murder Burke that's almost successful and takes the life of his partner. And the rest of the book involves Burke's search for not only who did it, but why they did it.
Now, in this book, you have a big underground, a network of people. You have his friend from the boys' town, if you will, Loon. You've got Mama, his new friend Jem the Mole.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a very fascinating. It's. I think you said it's off the grid where these people live, and I found that just totally engrossing. Just how did you come up with that?
Well, I came up with it from my life. I mean, you have to understand, these people are not friends and acquaintances, as you call them. This is Burke's family of choice. In Burke's world, as in mine, DNA doesn't mean anything. And you are what you do. So family is an operational term. Family is how you act. It has nothing to do with biogenetic connection.
Now these people, they're totally under the radar. I mean, you have Burke communicating with his friends with cell phones that are subsequently destroyed after 2 calls, untraceable. They use cash. They take the bus. They leave no fingerprints. They leave no rifled bullet slugs in anyone. They're totally anonymous. But they're outlaws. But
that's because they are actual outlaws.
Yeah.
Most people who commit crimes are not outlaws. In other words, they break the law and they go back to their lives. Yeah. These people live outside the law, in truth, at all times.
But they're not criminals.
Sure they are.
They I mean, in this book, they are. Burke is trying to solve a. He's trying to basically get even with somebody. Is what he wants to do.
He's trying to get even with somebody. His religion is revenge, but he's not at all squeamish about committing crimes in the furtherance of that religion. And it's clear because the search for someone who tries to kill you, who you don't know who it is, involves you going both forward and backward in your own life. You're going forward looking, but you have to go back into your life to figure out who it was. In going back through Burke's life, it becomes quite clear that he's a career criminal.
But he's also looking for some justice in the world. He's trying to well, I think, absolutely.
Well, his justice is very, very personal, very, very private. He's like a patriot in a 20-foot square country. He's not a vigilante. He doesn't strap on a pistol and say, I'm going to go out and make the world better or more just. He's a person that if you cross him, if you hurt his own, which he values way beyond his own life, his own people, then he's homicidal is the least of it. But he makes his living stealing. I mean, he doesn't have a day job.
He doesn't drive a taxi cab, that's for sure.
Well, he does, but not to make money off the meter. And there's a lot of things that Burke does because he lives just well below the observational level of society.
How big is unobservable level of society. You write with it. You write about it with a pretty commanding authority.
Oh, there's many people. I don't know much about small towns. In fact, I know very little about them. But I've been in and lived in a lot of big cities, and there's always a group of human beings who just don't show up on anybody's radar screen. Now, they did at one time. They might all have police records, for example. They might all have scars, marks, and tattoos. They might have left their trail, but you couldn't find them on a daily basis, and you wouldn't have a clue as to how they survive or earn their living.
Many times in the book, when you're describing Burke, and he talks about it himself, he's caught between he's explaining or he's fighting with himself, trying to find the difference between fear, rage, and retribution.
Mm-hmm. Look, Burke is not Philip Marlowe brought into the 90s, okay? Mm-hmm. He's not a white knight. He's not a handsome, brilliant, well-educated, sort of detached social commentator on life. He's not an observer. He's a participant.
Why would anybody want to read about a character? Because he is, even for his few good deeds, he is pretty despicable. Why would anybody really care about him?
I think people identify with him very, very closely because, for one thing, he's a card-carrying, I should even say scar-carrying member of the vast tribe that I call Children of the Secret, which is adults who were abused as children, and there was no intervention for them. There was no protection for them. And they survived one way or another, but they didn't survive undamaged.
Yeah, you made that point, and you in the book you said something. I just had to pull out a quote that was on page 30 of your book, which I think it can pretty much sum up Burke's life in his own words. He said, I'm going to paraphrase this. When they found him at birth, he was abandoned by his birth mother. And he says, she probably wrapped my low birth weight body in yellow crime scene tape instead of a baby blanket, which I think, the police did that, but I think that pretty much sums up his life.
Sure, it sums up his life. He has no first name. On his birth certificate, it says Baby Boy Burke.
Right.
It does sum up his life. Burke considers the state to be his parents, because the state raised him, and he hates his parents.
You made it in the book, in the grand finale, if you will, the book. We've got a place called Darcadia. What you have is a very wealthy man. I guess you can call him a psychopath. He's really off the radar, the sonar, the whatever in society. But he's getting together an island, and if you pay for citizenship, and it's going to be a country, you can do whatever you want unimpeded, and that goes for Aryan youth, neo-Nazis, and pedophiles. And I found your logic in how these two groups got together pretty interesting. Want to just explain that?
That's I wouldn't want to go into it during this interview, but you've actually hit the fulcrum of the whole book. I mean, if people were to understand where that Mobius strip, because it's not a continuum, actually intersects between what they think are completely unrelated groups, for example, neo-Nazis and child molesters, then I would have accomplished a lot with it.
And it made a lot. Let's not talk about it too much, but it made perfect sense to me, and I kind of wondered why, a semi-paranoid person like myself didn't, pick up on it before, just in my daily musings of, what happens in this world.
Yeah, that's the point of writing these books. They're not. There's plenty of people who read them just for entertainment, no question. But they're really aimed at the kind of person who goes, damn, when they get something, you see?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're speaking with Andrew Vachss, author of Dead and Gone, a Knopf publication. My name is Stephen Nestor, and you're listening to Poets of the Tabloid Murder. Let's get into the subject matter of the book, that of abused children. And what's the difference between incest and a child sexually abused by a stranger? Is there a difference? There seems to be a difference there.
Well, you got a perfect question. What's the difference? Well, the difference is that the impact on the child when sexually abused by human beings who have been constituted, I don't care what your belief system is, by God, by law, and by nature to be their protectors. when that human abuses them, it's a far more devastating assault than if a stranger were to do the same thing. And yet, due to an interesting anomaly in the law, let me give you an example from my home, from New York State. In New York State, if a human being, you notice I don't say a man, if a human being has sex with, say, a 10-year-old girl down the street, that's a B felony. It's a serious crime punishable by up to 25 years in prison. Now, if that same little girl is his little girl, at the prosecutor's sole discretion, this human being can be charged with incest, which is a Class E felony, automatically probation eligible.
Why is that?
Why?
Why is the law so, it's just makes no sense?
Well, it sure makes sense. What it's telling every freak in this country is you get bonus points for growing your own victim. But,
God.
But the reason the law is there is simply because the law is an artifact. In other words, when I say incest to the average person, they think of first cousins getting married.
True. Yeah, but I
Sure.
don't go much deeper than that. Yeah,
and that's what the law was designed. In other words, it's a law like the law against adultery. It's never really used. It was just to express society's disapproval. You understand?
Yep.
Okay. When that law was written, which was, a century and a half ago, nobody conceptualized people having sex with their own children. They were simply trying to say first cousins can't get married. But when they drafted the law, they used the word person instead of the word adult. And so the incest exception, this special loophole, was created.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, there's legislation that's about to be introduced in Congress called the CARE Act, C-A-R-E, sponsored by Congressman Robert Ney, N-E-Y, out of Ohio, which would eliminate the incest exception in every state in the Union.
It makes perfect sense to me, that's for sure.
Anytime I tell people about this, they're enraged. I mean, they're just absolutely berserk at the idea that raping your own child is penalized less than raping a neighbor's child.
You got a phone number you can blow over the air real quick?
The easiest way is for people to go to www.careact, that's one word, CAREACT.org.
And what's this? What's this website? It's for the.
It explains the legislation in detail.
Okay.
Gives all the endorsements, all the arguments, the history, says what you can do and how you can do it, how you can participate.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. What should be done with the abused, and what should be done with the abuser?
Well, what should be done with the abused is.
I mean, how can you?
It just really depends on the kind of abuse, the length of abuse, the intensity of the abuse, the relationship between victim and perpetrator. But broadly, what should be done is every goddamn thing possible.
Now, I saw television. I saw one of the news magazine shows. It was a couple years ago, and it really churned my stomach. They had it was a program for children who had been basically sexually abused and just abused. And these children were all different ages. I don't know where this was, but what the program entailed was they would try and re-raise this child from as close to the womb as they could go back. And with that
for God's sake.
I don't know. I guess what the idea was, you were going to build trust between the child and this counselor, and they had, there's grown men and women trying to hold a 5-year-old screaming child and give him a bottle.
I'm sorry, and those are good topics for Oprah, but they've got nothing to do with the real world.
Yeah, tell me about the real world.
The real world is you find where the strengths are and you try and build off those strengths, but you cannot do anything with an abused child unless and until that abused child is absolutely convinced that they're finally safe.
And that may take well into adulthood.
Well, it could. I mean, it absolutely could. It just depends, because there are so many factors at play, and the closer the relationship between victim and perpetrator, the harder it is to make the victim eventually feel safe.
Why is that?
Well, because look at the horrible combination of violation and bonding going on at the same time, you see?
Yes.
Very many abused kids literally idealize their abusers. I mean, they never stop loving them. They never stop saying, what it is that you did to me must have somehow been my fault.
You know, I interviewed a man a couple of weeks ago. His name is John Wilson, and there was pedophilia in his book, and the young child who was abused did in fact turn out to adore the abuser until the day he died.
I've seen that myself, so I don't, you know.
And this is a work of fiction, you know.
Well, you know what? When you talk about works of fiction and you talk about works of fact, the distinction kind of blurs when the fiction is based on actual events. Look, let me give you an example. Years and years ago, 1987, very beginning of 87, I wrote a book called Strega. And in that book, I discussed predatory pedophiles, modem trafficking, and kiddie porn. Well, the book reviewing community went insane on me. How could I have such a sick, crazy fantasy? What kind of twisted imagination could come up with such a thing? Obviously, if I wrote that book in 1997, nobody'd say anything, right?
It'd be a different story.
Right.
Yeah.
So this fiction that I wrote, it's because we're at ground zero. We were actually seeing the traffic. I wrote about it. I'll tell you this. If there was a God I believed in that I could pray to, what I'd pray is that what my books are based on was fiction, you see?
Yeah, absolutely. When did the media pick up on sexual abuse of children? When John Wayne Gacy became an artist and started selling his paintings from solitary confinement in Illinois, or when all of a sudden?
That's a good question, and my best guess is media seemed to discover child abuse, to acknowledge its reality in the 80s, and then, of course, they naturally went berserk and went too far and started seeing child abuse under every bed, and didn't, really apply rational criteria, so there's a very predictable backlash. What's happening is it's a pendulumistic movement. But I can tell you this, and this is what I always tell audiences. If I were an alien and I came to this country and my mission was to study America, say, I don't know, when Eisenhower was in the White House, like 1956, and I read every newspaper, I listened to every radio program, watched every TV show, saw every movie, checked out every magazine for an entire year, I would truthfully report back to the mothership that there's no child abuse in America.
It was a pretty sanitized place back then. It was there.
No, I don't mean that. It wasn't sanitized at all. It was an incredibly dangerous place to be a child, but none of it was reported.
Oh, I mean that's what I'm that's what I'm saying. I mean the media sanitized everything.
The media didn't. I mean, to not acknowledge the existence of something is not to sanitize it.
Well, they didn't acknowledge the existence. Okay, we'll refine that point. What should be done with the abuser? Can a tiger, so to speak, change its stripes?
Well,
Can you reform an abuser?
Most abusers are simply inadequates. They're people that don't know how to parent. Maybe they were raised with a strap and a stick, and they think they turned out okay, so they give the child a little more of that, helping the child to turn out even better.
To sexually abuse, though? I mean,
it's different. You cannot lump all abuse together.
Okay, we're going to talk about sexual abuse.
If you want to focus on sexual abuse, that's fine. But I need to tell you this: anyone who thinks sexual abuse is the most devastating form of abuse knows nothing about emotional abuse.
Okay, let's talk about that then.
But if you want to talk about sexual abuse, what should be done, as far as I am concerned, human beings who prey on our young need to be incapacitated. I don't believe there's any evidence to show them capable of so-called rehabilitation. They're at enormous risk for reoffending, and we need to separate them from their victims.
I agree with you. I don't know. I have nothing to back up my beliefs, but it just seems to me that every time when finally there's a big profile case like the one in New Jersey that resulted in Megan's Law, if you find out this is not his first conviction, this is not his first brush with the law.
I wrote about that, as a matter of fact, in detail, Jesse Demendicus. The question is, why is he out at all?
That's my question. Why, if it's, I like blondes, you like redheads, this is what these people like. It's as part of their makeup as our own preferences.
I don't agree because although I like blondes, I'm not stuck in that mode to the point where I would commit a crime to have a blonde. In other words, I don't care about people's state of mind. I never respond to terms like pedophilia. If somebody has intrusive fantasies about sex with children, if somebody, just thinks about it, what do I care? It's what they do. So to feel the feelings, I could grant you, is sick. But to act on the feelings, that's evil, and we have an obligation to respond to it.
What about let's just backtrack to get to someplace else. We talked about incest. What about in just sexual abuse? What about foreign countries where a girl is sold at age 10 to be the wife of an older man?
There are certainly cultures that countenance not only the abuse of children, not only the torture of children, but the sale of children, the use of children as work objects. There's also other cultures that countenance treatment of women that would gag a maggot.
Right.
But before we go around from our pulpit preaching to other cultures about how they should behave, I think our own house has to be a lot cleaner than it is.
Are there any places we shouldn't go to if we're concerned about that? Any things we shouldn't buy? Not to get too
well, I mean,
preachy.
if you get into that whole issue, I mean, I wouldn't buy anything that was made in China because I know they use slave labor. I wouldn't buy a Nike product because I know the conditions under which people have to work to produce Nike products. But it's a long list.
What's the biggest tourist attraction in Thailand? I mean, everybody knows that, right?
Well, unfortunately so. I mean, although Thailand now is not the leader, as far as we know, in child sex tourism anymore. I mean, it shifted to the Philippines, and it looks like there's a lot of action now coming out of Russia, a lot of action coming out of Cambodia. Anytime there's great economic crisis in a country, people start selling off their assets, and kids are one of the things they sell off.
Let's see, what was it, about 10 years ago, home computers started getting popular, and with that, the internet. And you've got browsers like Yahoo and, just name one. And those browsers will support the access to your basic commercial porn site, all the way down to the line to the subject we're speaking about, kiddie porn. I mean, how should these browsers be accountable for this? Should they be accountable for it?
For the transmission of... Look, let me explain. Child pornography is not a First Amendment issue. It's a photograph of a crime. The photograph cannot exist unless a crime was committed. The production or possession of it is a crime. Yeah, I mean, I think that the transmission of such material should be clearly criminalized, and it's not protected. People think the Internet's some kind of sacred place, and if you say the word, like censorship and the Internet in the same sentence, you're Satan. I'm not talking about censorship. What I'm talking about is banning contraband, and if images, photographic images of crimes being committed against children are not contraband, I don't know what is.
How can this? What's people say? You want to get rid of drugs? You legalize it, or you napalm the fields of Bolivia. How do you get rid of this crime?
Yeah,
can you get rid of this crime?
I know we've only got about a minute left, so I'll be brief. The basic way you do it is you raise the stakes. Right now, I'd do more time for a pocket full of cocaine than a semi-trailer full of kiddie porn. As long as you make it a very cheap buy-in, you're going to get more players. If you raise the stakes, you not only take major freaks out of the game, but you deter a whole bunch of others. Unless and until we're ready to properly criminalize all activities connected to the sexual abuse of children, including child pornography, we're not serious, and there is no war against it going on.
What can people do about that? I mean, how do you organize?
Well, they cannot waste their votes on narcissists like Nader, and actually try and demand of politicians responses to these issues. None of the people running for presidential office ever spoke to these issues. Not one of them.
Why not? It's too
because no one demanded that they did. Unlike gun control, unlike abortion, unlike issues that are important to people, nobody demanded that politicians speak to these issues.
I think they're afraid of it. You can't have your kids, you can't bring, come on, gather in the living room, kids. We're going to listen to the man running for president give a little speech. And as soon as he says the word kiddie porn, he's dead.
I couldn't disagree with you more. I think that the man or woman who stepped up and said, those people who violate our children take photographs of it and sell the photographs so that torturing our kids for pleasure and profit need to be put under the jail. I think a person get elected rather than shunned.
I agree with you. We've been speaking with Andrew Vachss, author of his 8th Burke novel, Dead and Gone. That's an Alfred A. Knopf publication. Andrew, thank you very much for being on the show. I think you explain a lot of things to a lot of people, and then there perhaps is a larger thing at work inside a work of fiction besides entertainment, although I have to say your books are entertaining to the max. And thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity,
Okay.
Steve.
My name is Stephen Nestor, and you've been listening to Poets of the Tabloid Murder.